Mic check, 1, 2. Mic check, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. Good.
Wiegefeld.
Good morning. I'd like to call this joint hearing of the subcommittees on transportation and public assets and government operations to order. Two of our subcommittees of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform are holding a joint hearing today, and the title of this hearing is A Safe Track. It deals, of course, with Washington Metro and oversight of WMATA safety and maintenance issues. Pleased to convene the hearing this morning, and the order of business is we'll start with the opening statements from members, and then we'll go to our panel of witnesses, and after we've heard from all of them, we'll go into questioning. With that, we'll begin the hearing, and let me recognize first Chairman Chaffetz, the chairman of the full committee. Mr. Chaffetz, you're recognized.
I thank you, Chairman, and I want to just take a point of personal privilege here. This is the last hearing that Mr. Mica will chair in the United States Congress. Mr. Mica has served with great distinction for 24 years in this body. He has served as the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. He's poured his heart and soul and into this nation and to this body over more than 2 decades. And so we want to say thank you. We want to say thank you, and we want to say thank you for the tremendous service that you have dedicated over the years, and you've been a great inspiration to a lot of us, and it's an honor and a privilege to serve with you. We wish you and your wife nothing but the best. But it is an honor to be with you this last hearing that you're going to chair, and we wish you nothing but the best. But God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Conley.
Speaking for the Democratic side of the aisle, I also want to wish you Godspeed and thank you for your service. We have a reputation for not always being able to collaborate on a bipartisan basis up here, but when you and I served together, you as chairman of the subcommittee and me as the ranking member, actually we made a lot of common music. And I think you did an awful lot of good, both here and, of course, on the Transportation Committee as well. I'm going to miss you personally, John. And on behalf of the Democratic side of the aisle, thank you for your service to your country.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, all the members of the committee. It's been a pleasure, Mr. Meadows, Mr. Jordan, and others that I've had the opportunity to serve with. A few minutes ago, we got to thank some of the staff for their work this year, and you can't operate an important committee like this without having tremendous staff, which on both sides of the aisle we've been blessed. So, while there may be some cheering from the bureaucrats that Mike is finally gone, I can assure you I still will be very actively engaged and involved. But there's no better committee to serve on. Now, I have chaired transportation, but this committee, dating back to 1808, performs such an important service for the American people. It really does. It's not an authorizer, it's not an appropriator, but it tries to make things right, get things right, and hold people accountable. And that's so important in our structure of government. So it's been my pleasure to serve, and I'm not finished yet, either with this hearing or in service to the people of this country, this great country. So thank you for those accolades. I wish I'd had more of them during my service. And my weird sense of humor, or sixth sense of humor, the humor my wife says most people don't understand that I have, is a inherited thing. So you try to keep a light side of it along the way, but we do have an important mission. With that being said, we need to get to our work here, and this is important work. And without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Kind of fitting in the last hearing here, it's on transportation, and I was honored to have this subcommittee, which is responsible for transportation oversight for the House of Representatives, under my watch for the past term. Unfortunately, today, we're back to where we've been before, and we've been some 4 times. This is our 4th hearing on oversight of, unfortunately, some of the problems with the D.C. Metro in this Congress. And those hearings go back to February of 2015, and then we did another one in July of 2015. In April of 2016, and again, this is our 4th. If you woke up this morning in metropolitan area, the District of Columbia, Northern Virginia, and Maryland, first thing I was greeted with is my colleague Jerry Conley on the radio blasting what we all found out in the report that was released yesterday. Some of the highlights of the NTSB report, we'll hear more about that, on the Falls Church derailment. And what is particularly troubling in that report is that, unfortunately, some of the information about the deterioration of the rail ties and lines in the area was reported and known for more than a year. There are questions about possible falsification of reports, intimidation of employees. Some folks were trying to do the right thing, and the safety issues were ignored, and that's a very, very serious matter. So we'll talk more about that. Again, it's the latest in a whole series of safety issues that we have addressed in these past hearings. And again, the latest report, not from us, but from NTSB, highlights that almost 17,000 open track defects are still waiting to be repaired, and some of these dating back to 2008. In a briefing on its investigation, the NTSB informed our committee that the state of Metro's rails is deplorable. Metro's current state of disrepair is that's their term, not ours, but we can join them in that evaluation. Metro's current state of disrepair is the result of years and years of deferring maintenance needs, negligence in some cases. Unfortunately, we've seen cases of gross mismanagement, and then also, most troubling for the taxpayers, as runaway costs. Mr. Wiedefeld's first safety first message has been encouraging, and we know he's been on the job a short period of time, but Metro has to continue to improve its performance. We are now halfway through the safe track rebuilding schedule, but the system continues to be plagued by safety incidents on almost a weekly basis. On July 5th, we had a second signal violation and a wreck. On July 29th, the train with 63 passengers on board derailed. On September 13th, the crowded train stalled at Farragut North for nearly 40 minutes with almost no announcements from the operators to the riders. On October 20th, 2 FTA safety inspectors were almost struck by a train that violated speed restrictions. And we continue to see arcing incidents, and I want to hear more about the status of where we are there, that have caused smoke, fire, and unfortunately, at one of the first junctures, we had a loss of life. It's been, unfortunately, now commonplace that that things are so bad, they've even created a website, and that website is metroonfire.com, to find out if Metro is in fact suffering from smoke or fire incidents at any particular time. These incidents and service disruptions continue to keep riders and the entire system in constant turmoil. Early in January 2015, the previous chairman of the Metro's board praised the outgoing manager for rebuilding the safety culture from top to bottom. After years of rebuilding under the $5 billion Metro Forward capital plan, that was his pronouncement. 4 days later, unfortunately, the La Enfant Plaza incident happened, which we had a loss of life and injured 91 people. We need to know both today, hear from these witnesses, and also in the future, we've got to be certain that things are heading in a different direction with this important system. When you see headlines that show the staggering safety lapses on a regular basis, and I said to the staff, just pull me some of the clips about some of these issues, the most recent. And then I said, are there a lot of them? And I said, we'll tag them. You can see just page after page. Now, these are just Washington Post articles. I don't know why you guys didn't get the Times, too, but this is just the Washington Post. Do you get the Times, Jerry?
I don't.
Okay, I didn't think so. So, but this is, again, an incredible array of headlines and articles that cite that the system is broken. We've had reports even that brand new rail cars are breaking down. And I heard one report that says 5 to 10,000 miles is a breakdown record of the new cars, an average of about 7,000 miles on a car, as opposed to 20,000 for the normal period in which a vehicle should not experience those problems. So we do have multiple problems. I was stopped by an individual when I was getting a Subway the other day, and he had some photos, and actually there's a photo and a video, but maybe they could put up the photo that he took of the workers. Can we get that put up? Okay. Well, you can count about 15 workers and about, 15 individuals employed by WMATA and about 3 people working in this scene. Actually, he also supplied me, we don't have it up there, a video showing a sort of time lapse that people are there but not working. And that raises a great question when the public is seeing this kind of operation with lots of people standing around. We've got some serious issues with even the folks that are there. And I've thanked the current director for going in, and he has made good in some of his challenges. In fact, I think he's eliminated 20 senior manager positions and reduced some of the headcount by 1,000. But you could see there's still a long way to go with some of the people who are not performing. And I'm going to ask some questions, too, about contracting some of this work based on performance and payment. I understand also that the union contract is not up for some of these workers, still in limbo. We'll hear on that. But there's got to be a better way to get better results and performance from those on the job. I do want to thank, again, the new director for the reforms that he's initiated. Maybe we could reterm this hearing, let's make Washington Metro great again. And that's something that we have a challenge and opportunity to do. We put an incredible amount of money into the system. I Googled last night the history of the system, and it's been around for 40 years, started with 4.7 miles. And it really is it was created as one of the finest rapid transit systems in the world, and we should be very proud of this system. It serves the nation's capital in this region, and it's a shame that we find ourselves in this particular situation. So I continue to work in an unofficial capacity to make certain that happens, and hopefully this hearing will help us rebuild Metro and restore public confidence in an important transportation system. The second largest carrier of commuters in the nation, and important in the everyday life of people in this region and to the United States of America. So look forward to working with you all, and I can turn to Mr. Conley, and I'm sure Mr. Conley will be very warm and fuzzy this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I'd ask unanimous consent that my colleagues, Mr. Beyer, Mr. Delaney, and Ms. Comstock, be allowed to participate in this hearing.
Reserving the right to object. Just kidding, Jerry, just kidding. Without objection.
And if the clock can go back to 5, please, for me. That was a UC request. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity, once again, to discuss safety, service, and budget challenges faced by the nation's transit system, WMATA. Each time this committee revisits this topic and exercises its federal oversight prerogative with regard to Metro, we're reminded of the close relationship between the functionality of the federal government itself and the health of the nation's capital transit system. It should come as no surprise that a congressional committee tasked with ensuring the efficiency of the federal government and the safety of its workforce has a vested interest in the success of that transit system that delivers more than 1/3 of the area's federal workforce every day. In March, when Metro announced that it would shut down for 24 hours to conduct emergency inspections, the first question on everyone's mind was how would the federal government's Office of Personnel Management accommodate that closure. Unlike any other transit system in the United States, this one is so dependent on the federal workforce for its customer base. Federal government is the primary stakeholder in this transit system, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure that federal support for Metro is commensurate to its fundamental reliance on the system. As federal stakeholders, I think our organizing principle should be that failure of Metro cannot be an option. When this committee held a hearing on Metro in April, the system was in crisis. All lights were blinking red. The hearing and witness testimony enumerated the system's mounting crises in leadership, safety, customer confidence, and finance. It was clear that the situation required bold and immediate action, and that the status quo for Metro was the rail to perdition. The purpose of the hearing today is to examine whether Metro has stepped back from the precipice and whether and how the system can set a trajectory for safe, reliable, and sustainable operations. Unfortunately, the leadership crisis at Metro has evolved rather than diminished. After going 10 months without a general manager, Metro finally has somebody at the helm, and General Manager Paul Wiedefeld has demonstrated he understands that the problems plaguing Metro are systemic. One does not have to agree with every major decision he's made to appreciate the fact that, thank God, he's willing to make them. He came to the position with desperately needed, relevant experience, even though the board fought about what really was required and preferred a green eyeshade accountant to somebody with experience in operations. We were fortunate we didn't go down that road. The enduring leadership crisis at Metro resides in the WMATA Board of Directors. Some board members seem bent on proving that the governing body is wholly incapable of resuscitating, much less managing Metro. Threats to scrap a major expansion of Metro to Dulles International Airport pit jurisdiction against jurisdiction and fracture the true regionalism necessary for Metro's success. And I assure you, Mr. Evans, it will have repercussions up here among your allies and your partners. It's destructive and not welcome. I've spent the last 21 years of my life working on Metro-related issues. First as a member of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, and then as chairman of Fairfax County for 5 years. I made appointments to the Metro Board. I rezoned property around Metro stations to maximize their potential. I approved the local operating subsidy every year, without question, and helped create the local tax districts to fund construction of the new Silver Line with the full approval of Metro and Metro's board. In Congress, I've worked diligently with my colleagues to save the $150 million annual federal commitment for safety improvements, which is matched by the Virginia localities and Maryland and D.C., and help secure financing for the Silver Line, working with then-Secretary Ray LaHood to both reduce costs and to secure funding for that Silver Line. So it's personally painful to witness members of the WMATA board so mismanage an institution this region has invested in and fall back on the very parochialism some condemned. From a congressional perspective, threats to cancel major federal investments, rampant parochialism, and political theater on that board destabilize efforts to secure an increased and appropriate level of federal support up here. It's not like we have that many friends. And to fracture the support we've got jeopardizes everything you need in Capitol Hill. General Manager Wiedefeld deserves credit for taking the initiative within 6 months of becoming General Manager to begin a sweeping program that will seek to carry out 3 years' worth of maintenance in 1 year. Leading up to the announcement of Safe Track in May, fires, major track defects, and arcing incidents, including one that claimed the life of Carol Glover, had exposed dire maintenance situation in Metro. While Safe Track gives us something tangible to point to when assessing efforts to improve Metro safety, the safety problems at Metro go far beyond the replacement of high-voltage cables and defective third-rail insulators. I welcome the Safe Track metrics from Metro that include the replacement of 26,000 cross ties and 10,000 fasteners since the beginning of the maintenance blitz. However, this week, the National Transportation Safety Board released a report on the East Falls Church derailment in July, and it found once again that Metro track inspectors were not conducting inspections in accordance with written policy and responding to defects in real time. Indeed, the NTSB found clear evidence that Metro safety inspectors deliberately falsified reports, endangering public safety once again. In the report, NTSB reiterated its recommendation to the Department of Transportation, the Federal Department of Transportation, that FRA, not FTA, ought to have safety responsibility and oversight for Metro. The report stated, and I quote, "The FTA oversight model lacks minimum safety standards, expertise, and the resources to provide assurance that corrective action plans are completed," unquote. I've repeatedly shared my concern that the FTA does not have the tools necessary to provide robust oversight of Metro, and I think the derailment in East Falls Church is a case in point. The customer confidence picture continues to worsen. Ridership is already down 13% in this fiscal year. Safe Track has been disruptive to commuters, and pending proposals for increased fares and diminished service could only hasten the vicious downward spiral. But I might add, Loose talk about closing large sections of the system continued to contribute to the loss of consumer confidence and ridership confidence. Will it be there in the future? Apparently not. As the General Manager noted in its FY18 proposed operating budget, the primary cause of Metro's current budget challenge, a $290 million budget gap, is declining rail ridership, which has been on this downward trajectory since 2009. Fortunately, there is an effort from management to assert the primacy of safety in metric culture and improve reliability that could go a long way to restoring faith in the system. Going forward, staff reductions, service cuts, and fare increases are not going to bring about long-term stability. Metro is the only major transit system without a dedicated source of funding, and the system relied upon a patchwork of subsidies from local jurisdictions. Metro receives 47% of its operating budget from local and state subsidies, but not a federal subsidy, and 0% from a dedicated source of revenue. 0%. In my hometown of Boston, our transit system sees those figures in reverse, with 0% coming from local subsidies and 64% coming from a dedicated source of revenue. In my role as chairman of Fairfax in 2004, I helped launch the Blue Ribbon Panel on Metro that ultimately recommended a regional sales tax and called on the Federal Government to participate significantly in addressing the projected shortfall for capital maintenance and system enhancement. There's clearly an appetite for Metro to meet certain safety and reliability metrics before new funding commitments are made. However, lamentations about performance will not solve Metro's problems if we continue to ignore the dysfunctionality of the Metro Board, the culture of indifference that pervades the workforce, and the absence of stable revenue any transit system needs to operate. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Chairman Micah. And before I begin, Mr. Micah, I want to just recognize not only the outstanding service that you have provided the great folks of Florida and the United States as a whole, but a personal friendship to me. As a new guy coming in that had no idea what went on behind the scenes or what went on out there, you took a young guy from North Carolina and actually invested in me in a way that, quite frankly, I'll never forget. You and Pat are dear friends. It's been a difficult year. I want to let you know that I sincerely appreciate your friendship, your leadership, your investment, your love, and your compassion for the people that you serve. If they knew what I knew, that every day that you were worried about serving them more than serving yourself, I think that they would rise up with a statue. And I just want to say that I have a personal statue in my heart of a man that I appreciate so much. And you know, in my district, we're the only district in the United States with a place called Micahville. And so every time I go by, I will remember it. So let me go and turn to the business of today, and let's get serious. I can tell you, when I have my good friend Jerry Conley as upset as he is today, I take notice. We talked about this yesterday. We've talked about it multiple times. But what we have here is a systemic failure to address real problems that actually not only affect ridership and the financial stability, but the safety aspect of our inaction is causing great peril, loss of life, and quite frankly, it can't be tolerated anymore. This is our fourth hearing. I'm tired of hearings. I'm tired of excuses. I'm tired of us going back and forth to look at these issues and say, well, if you just give us a little bit more time, we'll get it fixed. WMATA is not a fine wine. It does not improve with time. What we must do is we must act today. The gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Comstock, she has called me a number of times saying that we have got to address this particular issue over and over and over again. And yet, here we are with Safe Track and learning that indeed, as we start to embark on it, and Mr. Wiedefield, I want to say thank you. You're making tough choices. You know, I can tell you it is not good for your career. Because every time that you make a tough choice, you have a critic that is out there that is wanting to suggest that you shouldn't be making that choice. But quite frankly, we needed your kind of leadership years ago. This is a systemic problem that has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed now. Now, it will require difficult decisions, and as my good friend Mr. Conley just pointed out, some of the decisions that are being contemplated by the board, Mr. Evans, are troubling. You and I know that we've had some personal meetings, and I'm willing to invest the political capital in a way that does not play well back in North Carolina. But I'm willing to do that to fix this system once and for all. But what I'm not willing to do is to ignore what has become a reoccurring theme. Every time we get a new report, every time that we start to see something, we start to find out things that we should have known months and years ago. You know, to hear the report of falsified records is just mind-blowing. It's just, you know, when you know that we're going to have this kind of detail to look at it, it's mind-blowing. And the death and injury of individuals fall at the responsibility of some of those very people who look the other way when we have issues that we have to address. And so we're going to fix this. We're going to fix this right away. And what we're going to make sure of as we look at the track record is that we make hard decisions. And so, Mr. Jackson, I'm looking forward to hearing from you today. What are the hard decisions that you're willing to make as well? Because what we have here is we've got everybody pointing fingers at everybody else. They're saying, well, it was not my job. Well, it's not my responsibility. Or if we just had a little bit more money, we could fix it. Let me just tell you, we do have a money problem, but this is not, the genesis of this problem is not money. The genesis of this problem is a culture that we have allowed to pervade and exist for a long time. WMATA has become the butt of jokes, but let me tell you, it's not a joking matter. When you have people stuck on a track and they can't get a hold of an operator for 30 minutes, and then you start to unload them onto and get off on a track where you have an active possibility for electrocution, I mean, that's a real problem. And Mr. Wiedefield, you and I have talked on a couple of occasions, and some of the other safety concerns that are out there, we need a little bit more transparency so I don't get surprised by reading about something in the Washington Post. Now, and by doing that, I understand that you're trying to evaluate. But the other part of that is from an oversight standpoint, if we're going to make investments for federal dollars, we have got to make sure that there is a good plan in place to address these. And so today I'm looking forward to hearing from each one of you on how we can address that. Chairman Hart, you're here back to hopefully give us some marching orders, but it's not good enough if it's in a report and it doesn't get acted upon. It's not good enough that we fail to go and do what is necessary to do this. So as we start to look at this, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your leadership on this area. What you are going to find are two bulldogs in a bipartisan way with Mr. Conley and I. We're not going to let this go. And it's not because I write it. It's just the safety and health and welfare of the people of this greater Washington, D.C. metro area that is at stake. We've got to fix it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Well, thank you, and I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who'd like to submit a written statement and recognize Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr.
for a unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that the written statements from Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer and Senator-elect Chris Van Hollen be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Okay. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses, and I'm pleased to welcome to this morning the Honorable Christopher Hart, Chairman of the NTSB, Mr. Matthew Welby's, Executive Director of the Federal Transit Administration, Mr. Paul Wiedefeld, who is the General Manager of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, Mr. Jack Evans, Chairman of the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority, and Mr. Raymond Jackson, Second Vice President of the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 689. I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses. This is an investigation and oversight committee hearing, and we do swear in all of our witnesses. So if you'll please rise, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? And the record will reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I think, well, maybe not everybody's been here, but we try to limit our testimony to 5 minutes. And if you have requests for additional information, data, or testimony to be added to the record, just request that through the chair, and your entire statement will be made part of the record. So we'll start out this morning and recognize first Mr. Hart, Chairman of the NTSB. Welcome back, sir, and you are recognized.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Mica, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the two subcommittees. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on behalf of the NTSB. Chairman Mica, thank you for your years of service in Congress and all that you have done to advance transportation safety. I'd like to join all the accolades that you have already received this morning. I also appreciate Congress's continued attention to oversight of rail transit safety on WMATA's Metro Rail system. About 3 weeks ago, the NTSB announced its most wanted list of transportation safety improvements for 2017 and 2018, which again included improving rail transit safety oversight. The NTSB investigations of rail transit accidents involving WMATA continue to show that safety oversight of WMATA is unreliable, which increases the risk of further accidents, injuries, and loss of life. An effective, independent oversight system must be created to ensure that the highest possible level of safety is afforded to WMATA's riders and employees. Inadequate oversight of WMATA's Metro Rail system is a persistent problem. In general, the NTSB investigations of WMATA have found that although safety program plans were in place, they were not effectively implemented or overseen. Oversight challenges regarding WMATA are particularly acute because of WMATA's unique oversight structure. Most transit properties involve one jurisdiction, and a few involve two, one of which typically takes oversight responsibility. WMATA is the only transit property in the United States that involves 3 jurisdictions: Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. Moreover, these 3 jurisdictions collectively share oversight responsibility. This constitutes a challenge seen by no other rail transit system in this country. My written statement further details the history of rail transit safety oversight in general and of WMATA's 45 years of inadequate safety oversight. Despite efforts over the years to improve the FTA's rail transit safety oversight capabilities, the NTSB's investigation of the fatal electric arcing and smoke accident at L'Enfant Plaza on January 12, 2015 revealed a transit system with no effective safety oversight. As a result of this investigation, the NTSB issued urgent safety recommendations to the Secretary of Transportation on September 30, 2015 to seek authority for the Federal Railroad Administration to exercise safety oversight over WMATA. Unlike the Federal Transit Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration has robust regulatory, inspection, and enforcement powers, allowing it to more quickly and more effectively address hazards and improve the overall safety of WMATA's rail operations. The Secretary of Transportation instead tasked the Federal Transit Administration with direct safety oversight of Metro Rail, the first such direct oversight that the FTA has ever exercised. The FTA has limited staff to carry out the function, has no regulations against which to measure compliance, and does not have the authority to levy civil or individual penalties in response to safety deficiencies. The Department of Transportation furthermore envisioned a short-term FTA oversight role, imposing a deadline of February 9, 2017 for WMATA's 3 jurisdictions to create an effective state oversight agency. Yet, in the face of that, we've just learned that Maryland and Virginia have recently notified DOT that they will not meet this deadline. The NTSB remains concerned that Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia will continue to encounter impediments. I want to stress again the difficulty in forming an oversight body that reports to 3 jurisdictions. There is still no known date by which such a body will be established. In the meantime, we continue to investigate accidents that illustrate the need for immediate action. Yesterday, the NTSB issued an accident brief on the East Falls Church derailment that occurred on July 29, 2016, already referred to in this hearing. The probable cause of the accident was a wide track gauge condition resulting from the sustained use of deteriorating wooden cross ties due to WMATA's ineffective inspection and maintenance practices and inadequate safety oversight. Of particular concern is that NTSB investigators learned that the defective track conditions that led to the East Falls Church derailment had been previously identified by WMATA inspectors, yet were not properly remediated. NTSB investigators were also provided additional documentation from WMATA showing almost 17,000 open defects reported by WMATA track workers, some going back as far as October 2008, as already mentioned this morning, and these are still waiting to be repaired. This accident further illustrates why immediate action is required to address safety issues at WMATA. The NTSB remains convinced that with the history of accidents at WMATA, the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, their more established oversight program is vital to increasing passenger safety. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Recognize now the FTA Administrator. Welcome, sir, and you're recognized.
Chairman Mike and Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to provide an update on FTA's oversight of the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority. And Chairman Mike, thank you for your support building public transportation and our work together on Sunrail over the years. Safety remains the top priority for FTA and the United States Department of Transportation. And with that in mind, FTA has used the authority granted to us by Congress to ensure safety improvements among FTA grantees, including Metrorail. At this time, significant work remains to bring Metrorail into a state of good repair, to build a strong safety culture, and to improve the agency's financial outlook. Years of underinvestment and deferred maintenance have contributed to Metrorail's deterioration. And it's because of this deterioration that Metrorail's daily passengers have not received the safe, reliable service they should expect. Recently, FTA has observed important steps by WMATA leadership prioritizing safety over revenue service, but establishing and ensuring an enduring safety culture remains a critical task. WMATA received over $450 million from FTA in fiscal year 2016, and FTA has ensured that these capital dollars are prioritized for improving safety, infrastructure, and reliability. In some instances, FTA has used this authority to redirect federal funding to safety and state of good repair priorities. During 2016, FTA conducted investigations into Metrorail track integrity, stop signal overruns, and vehicle securement that led to specific corrective actions that WMATA must complete. There are results from FTA's work. For the first time since 2012, all rail traffic controllers in WMATA's Rail Operations Control Center have completed required annual certifications, and approximately 2,000 employees who had expired Roadway Worker Protection Program certifications are now retrained and certified. In addition, while FTA is not in charge of the day-to-day work of SafeTrack, FTA directives guided WMATA's prioritization of SafeTrack work to locations where the most urgent repairs were required to reduce the risk of smoke and fire events. As a result, WMATA corrected numerous instances of degraded fire and life safety equipment in tunnels that affect emergency passenger evacuations. In addition to investigations, FTA has conducted both announced and unannounced inspections and leads accident investigations as warranted. FTA conducted more than 300 inspections during the past year. We've identified more than 900 remedial actions to date, and to date, WMATA has addressed 2/3 of those. During our inspections, FTA has identified operating practices and track conditions that led to immediate orders for slow zones or track segment closures protecting passengers and workers from unsafe conditions, and much more progress is required. It is important to note that Secretary Fox has made clear that FTA's role is temporary based on the Federal statutory framework. Our work will continue until Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia establish a new State Safety Oversight Agency as required under Federal law. The 3 jurisdictions are required to receive certification of a new State Safety Oversight Program no later than February 9, 2017, and failure to meet this deadline could result in the withholding of up to $15 million in Federal transit funding from 22 communities in Maryland and Virginia outside of the Washington, D.C. region. In conclusion, FTA provides robust direct safety oversight of Metrorail that is making a difference. Based on our unique knowledge of transit agencies throughout the U.S., we are supporting and guiding the critical steps needed to improve WMATA infrastructure, safety culture, and operations, while ensuring that the jurisdictions step forward and take responsibility for their statutory role. The WMATA bus and rail system is vital to our nation's national capital region, the economy, and the millions of people who rely on it, including me. There is more work ahead that must occur at WMATA to make it safer and more reliable. I thank you for this opportunity to discuss FTA's direct safety oversight of Metrorail, and I look forward to answering questions.
We'll now hear from the WMATA Administrator, and welcome you back.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Mica, Chairman Meadows, and Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the committee. I'm Paul Wiedefeld, the General Manager and Chief Executive Officer of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, known as Metro. I want to especially thank and recognize Chairman Mica, who has been a long and distinguished career, obviously, in helping infrastructure around the country. Thank you for your service, sir. Immediately upon joining Metro last year, we went to work to restore public confidence by improving safety and security and making service more reliable and getting Metro's financial house in order. As we work to improve Metro, I have sought to and will continue to make clear to our customers, employees, and the entire region that safety comes before service. The year-long Safe Track program reflected that commitment to safety over service. Safe Track accelerates 3 years' worth of work into approximately 1 year. The plan significantly expands maintenance time on weeknights, weekends, and midday hours, and includes 15 safety surges for major projects. And as I detailed in my written testimony, we have implemented a number of other programs to continue to improve customer and employee safety as well as the customer experience. To sustain this progress going forward, we have proposed a preventive maintenance program to the WMATA Board. We are requesting an additional 8 hours a week to do preventive maintenance inspections on the system. The goal of the preventive maintenance program is to reduce service disruptions due to track failures and create opportunities to identify and repair track problems before they disrupt daytime rail service. On the financial side of the house, Metro ended fiscal year 16 on budget and received an on-time clean audit with no findings in the first time in 3 years. Also, for the first year in recent histories, Metro's capital program invested $1 billion in the system, spending 85% of projected capital budget in fiscal year 16, compared to spending approximately 65% in previous years. And in the current fiscal year, we are on a path to spend nearly $1.2 billion, meeting our budget forecast. Looking ahead, WMATA must bridge a significant projected revenue resource gap in order to achieve the balanced operating budget in fiscal year 2018. Daily ridership on bus and rail has declined significantly in response to poor service quality and reliability, as well as external factors, while at the same time costs have continued to increase. To address this funding gap, the proposed operating budget recommends a number of actions, including the elimination of an additional 500 positions for a total of 1,000 positions in fiscal year 18, outsourcing certain functions, a reduction in rail service, increased fares, and elimination of certain bus routes, and increased subsidies at the local jurisdictional level. While we will continue to improve the overall safety and financial management of the system, we will be putting much greater emphasis on customer experience, particularly with regards to reducing unscheduled delays due to poor track conditions, improving the reliability of our train fleet, and enhancing the station environments in 2017. Our goal for 2017 is to reduce delays caused by train cars by 25%, and unplanned delays caused by track issues by 50%. Finally, we'll be establishing a customer-driven metrics, which will measure our performance to inform our decision-making from a customer point of view and will be used as a management tool for employee accountability. I will close by thanking Congress for your continued support of Metro through the federal funding, particularly the PREA funding, which are invested in long-term improvements to the system. You have my full commitment that I will continue to work to get Metro back to good. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Chairman Evans. You're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Chairman Mica, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Duckworth, Ranking Member Conley, members of the subcommittee, and I too want to lend my voice to Mr. Chairman Mica for your great service here to the city and to the country. Thank you for that. I serve as the Principal Director from Washington, D.C. on the WMATA Board, and for the last 10 months have been the Chairman of the Board of WMATA. In addition to that, I am the Ward 2 Council Member on the Council of the District of Columbia, which represents the Central Business District, 11 surrounding neighborhoods, 12 Metro stops. Since 1999, I've chaired the Council's Committee on Finance and Revenue. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the committee today and provide updates from my prior testimony in April 13th of 2016, and since then, WMATA has taken significant steps to improve safety, reliability, and fiscal management of the system. I do want to personally take this opportunity to thank Congressman Hoyer, Congressman Norton, Congressman Conley, Congressman Meadows, and Congressman Comstock, who I had an opportunity to meet with personally on these matters. And I want to really take this time to thank you for taking the time to sit down personally and meet with me. At the top of the organization, the majority of the Board of Directors has turned over in the past 2 years. We now have 12 out of 16 new board members, including 3 new federal representatives who joined the board last spring. In my estimation, and I served on the board back in the 1990s for 10 years, this is the best qualified, most involved, and most transparent board that we have ever had at Metro. Our General Manager, Paul Wiedefeld, has now been at the helm for a year. And in that time, he's been able to put together a new senior leadership team and implement major initiatives to fix the rail system, restructure, excuse me, and right-size the agency, and better maintain the rail card fleet. Mr. Wiedefeld has provided detailed information about these, but to summarize again, WMATA has made personnel changes, operational changes. So far this year, he has hired a new Chief Operating Officer, a new Chief Safety Officer, both of whom have decades of experience in New York City, a new General Counsel, and a new Chief of Internal Business Operations to improve our procurement and administrative functions. He's also restructured the management team in March to break down some of the long-standing divisions within the agency. As pointed out, he's fired 20 senior managers and has already eliminated over 500 positions in the agency. The agency has been undergoing the aggressive Safe Track project, which we have discussed here. However, it is important to keep in mind that Safe Track will not solve all of the agency's problems, and it will make it safer, it will make it more reliable, but in the words of, and Mr. Connolly, you may appreciate this, Winston Churchill, I know you're a big fan as well as I am, it's not the end, it's not the beginning of the end, it's probably just the end of the beginning, and that is a true statement about where we are in Metro's maintenance. WMATA's financial condition can be summed up in 3 numbers. If you remember last time I was here, I told you the numbers, 300, 18, and 2.5. The numbers have changed a little, but not much. First, the 300 is 290. 290 is a projected $290 million operating shortfall in the fiscal year 2018 budget, which we are dealing with now, runs from July 1st to June 30th of 2018. The gap includes $103 million from ridership and revenue loss, $87 million from expense growth related to Safe Track, and $100 million that the agency transferred from capital dollars to operating dollars to balance the budget last year. Next, 18. 18 is still 18. It's the $18 billion in capital needs that the agency faces over the next 10 years. WMATA has produced now a detailed capital needs inventory and reported back to the board this week that the cost of simply deferred maintenance and the state of good repair needs over the next 10 years is $17.4 billion. This is essentially a bare-bones capital investment needed to get the system back to a baseline of operations. Additionally, WMATA should execute approximately $800 million of preventive maintenance measures over the next 10 years in order to improve its reliability. These capital needs do not include an estimated $7 billion in new needs related to compliance with NTSB and FTA directives and other issues, particularly like the Roslyn bottleneck. Briefly, that is the Roslyn bottleneck, the need for a new tunnel because of the construction in Virginia to carry the trains into the district. It is a $3.5 billion item that is not included in any of our numbers, and frankly hasn't even been started the studying of how we're going to build this tunnel. Finally, 2.8. 2.5 was the number I gave you before. In the months I've been here since April, it is now 2.8. It is WMATA's unfunded pension and other post-employment benefits liability deficit. The WMATA board has created a special pension committee to review our pension plans and try to figure out how to deal with this unfunded liability. $2.8 billion is a staggering amount for an organization of our size that is an unfunded liability. If we fail to address these pension obligations, WMATA will find itself in exactly the same place District of Columbia was in 1995. We had a $10 billion unfunded liability, and it almost brought the city down. The financial situation at WMATA is dire. To fill the short-term operating budget gap, the jurisdictions, Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, need to increase their subsidy contributions collectively next year by $250 million. The alternatives, raising fares by 35%, closing low ridership stations during off-peak hours, continuing to use capital funds for our operating budget, puts WMATA at serious risk. And again, on the capital side, without an increase from our current $1.1 billion annual capital funding resources to approximately $1.8 billion, we will continue to have the system we have today, only further stressed by the hundreds of thousands of new riders that we anticipate in the next decades. It's important to note here, as Mr. Wiedefeld mentioned, that in addition to more capital funding, WMATA has improved its capability to utilize those funds. And in the past, we were only spending about 65% of them. Mr. Wiedefeld has now got us up to the point where we spent almost 100% of the money on capital that we have allocated for the year. We spent over $1 billion, which was the highest ever. So finally, in conclusion, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you today the continued financial problems at WMATA and the steps we have taken to put the agency on a better footing moving forward. It's easy to think of WMATA as an autonomous entity separate from the rest of the region, but it's important to remember this. WMATA is a $40 billion asset, a $40 billion asset, in which all of us, federal government, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, each have a 25% interest. So with this $40 billion asset, what are we collectively going to do to take this asset and maintain it and make it better? So I believe with the increased funding, with the steps our general manager is taking, and with the collective will of all of us in the region, we can fix WMATA. And it is, as has been said before, failure is not an option. So thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, and we'll hear from Mr. Raymond Jackson, who's with the Amalgamated Transit Union Local. Welcome, sir. You're recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ranking committee members.
Good Lord.
Mr. Chairman, I also want to thank you for your years of dedicated service. My name is Raymond Jackson, and I'm the second vice president of ATU Local 689. Today, I'm here to give insight into the Safe Track program and the challenges that are facing the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority in the near and distant future. When Safe Track was first introduced, Local 689 was hopeful that it would mark a departure from the culture and old practices at WMATA. As things have progressed, we are now concerned that WMATA's failure to consult with our union and with the experienced employees on the ground will be its fatal flaw. Had our input been solicited, we would have worked to find a better way of getting the work done without disrupting the lives of so many riders in this region. We all have family members who ride the system daily, and most of us ride the system as well. So we know the frustrations with Safe Track firsthand. Unfortunately, the reality of Safe Track that it is a necessity at this point. If work had been done over the past 20 years, WMATA would not be disrupting the lives of the people in this region in the way that they have the past 6 months. At this point, Safe Track is what riders of the region are left with after decades of mismanagement and neglect. We are also concerned that WMATA continues reliance on outside contractors to do the work that can be done by Local 689 members has become a way for private companies with no investment in this system to make boatloads of money at the expense of the public and our riders. Many times our members end up having to redo work done by these outside companies. It is frustrating for frontline employees and shows a lack of respect for the expertise that our members have. Our local deal with constant complaints about the lack of employee morale. In other transit systems in this country and around the world, there's a culture of labor management cooperation where employees are treated with dignity on the job. Their opinions are valued, and they have a sense of ownership in the work that they do. That is not the WMATA way. By and large, the invaluable source of knowledge that has represented our longtime employees is overlooked and sometimes even ignored by management, which leads me to WMATA's budget proposal going into fiscal year 2018. Local 689 is concerned that the drastic service cuts and fare increases proposed by the agency in response to the impact of Safe Track are sure to be the death of this system. The fact is, people need safe, affordable, and reliable transit service. The only way to bring back riders is to restore public confidence in Metro. This will no doubt be a slow process. We have to prove ourselves all over again to a public that has understandably had enough of Metro's enormous problems. Asking our riders to deal with even longer waits through longer headways and stranding bus riders by eliminating 14 bus lines is not going to restore customer satisfaction. Neither will increasing rail and Metro bus fares. The proposed increase will put a hurt on some of our most transit-dependent riders who have no other way to get around. Like most transit systems that cut routes, WMATA is looking toward those with low ridership, early morning, late night, and weekend service. People who work non-traditional hours will be disproportionately affected. Laying off 1,000 employees, once again shedding sorely needed knowledge and putting a huge burden on a shell of a workforce is not only ill-advised, but also dangerous. Yet this is WMATA's plan to dig out of this hole. Through its slash-and-burn budget proposal, Metro is using a self-inflicted Safe Track crisis to justify mass cuts in service that will never be accepted in this region under normal circumstances. Metro riders need to call them out, letting them know that we need more, not less service. If we go along with this plan, people will forever abandon the system, and it will crumble, causing an embarrassing mobility crisis in our nation's capital. The answer to Metro's current budget hole in short-term cash is a short-term cash infusion to get the system back on its feet. If Congress had not come into the aid of the American auto industry during the financial crisis 7 years ago with a $80 billion bailout, these companies would have evaporated. Now the American transit system needs a smaller boost. We call on Congress, Maryland, D.C., and Virginia to come through with the revenues necessary to see Metro through these crises and urge the agency to work hand-in-hand with us in the effort to prolong and develop a long-term dedicated funding stream from the Federal Government and the jurisdictions that will help improve the system and ensure that we never face these dire circumstances ever again. Transit riders and our members deserve nothing less. Thank you.
I thank all of the witnesses, and we'll turn now to questions. I guess I started out commenting on the East Falls Church derailment NTSB report, and it quite specifically says that interviewers suggest that inspectors fabricated track measurement and inspection reports. I've got some of the inspection reports that were ignored. Mr. Wiedefeld, I know we just got the report yesterday, and you know, almost every time you come before me, I say, well, steps need to be taken to hold people accountable. And you've done that. You got rid of some of the management people who were not effective and others. Now, can this, it seems like it's fairly simple to trace this back to people from the report and who they interviewed, and then the reports that were submitted, someone was responsible for ignoring those reports. Can these people be held accountable? Now, you know me, my recommendation is fire those that did not perform. Can we have some results and action based on what we've seen from this report?
And yes, Mr. Chairman, if I could just give you a bit of background. What the NTSB actually reported is the information that we gave them. That was part of a independent investigation that I had started immediately, where I had outside people come in.
So have those people been, I mean, you had the information and gave it to them. Have you taken action already?
Yes. What I did immediately is once I basically got informed about what we were hearing and what we were seeing, I started a criminal investigation. I hired 2 independent prosecutors. That investigation is still open.
Okay.
So I do not want to comment any further on that.
Okay.
But that is exactly what we will be doing.
Again, holding people accountable, and that there are consequences for inappropriate or negligent action, and if it's worse than that, they need to be held. I'm told that I asked about an inspector general for the operation or someone overseeing. I'm told that that's a weak position, either through the performance of the current individual or the position not having the authority to go in and take some action. What's your assessment?
The OIG answers to the board. They do not answer to me. That office is unanswered to me.
Mr. Evans, you want to comment on it? Again, unless you have somebody with some teeth to go after people, and the information that I'm getting is the IG is either weak in performance or the position is weak. What do you say?
What I have tried to do as the Chairman, Mr. Chairman, is to empower the IG to be more aggressive than it has been in the past.
Do you set that authority up, or is that set by a statute, Federal statute?
Federal statute. It's in the compact.
It is Federal statute?
Yes.
I'm not going to be here, but that might be something you all could look at, is strengthening the IG position so it's got some teeth. Somebody's got to do something. I mean, they see something wrong, and there has to be action taken. That's why we have the IG system, and if it's weak. So that would be something I would recommend either. If you don't have that authority, you need to get the information to the folks that can modify that and do it quickly. Mr. Hart, what's the status of our arcing connections?
Thank you for the question. We just issued our final report on that recently, so the recommendations are relatively recent. The recommendations that are a little older were our urgent recommendations about the connection of the power cables that they needed, that we saw many of them were missing some of the sleeves to keep the stuff out.
I went down, looked at that.
Correct.
I saw the arc.
And we're seeing good progress on the action to those.
But where are we? Do you know? Maybe Mr. Wiedefeld can tell me.
Yes, we've eliminated, it's the orange boots.
Right.
We have basically replaced all those in the underground system, which is where the key issue is. And we have, basically, we have about 5% left on the above ground, and that's to be done with the remaining surges. When we get into those surge areas, we'll replace those.
Okay, so you're about 5%. So the smoke, maybe this site that I cited that you can go on and see if Metro's on fire can be taken down pretty soon. Okay, our arcing and the connections, communications, worked on that for God knows how long. Where are we? I understand the agreement has been executed with the cell companies. The installation has begun. I understand there's only 3 areas between stations that are now operating.
Sure, yes.
Up and operating.
Right, we will continue to do that. Basically, we're doing that as part of the shutdowns
I
that
know,
we're doing.
but that's not good. What is the schedule?
The red line, east side of red line will be done in 17.
How many total? There's 70, is it, that areas that aren't covered? And we have 3 underway, and then I'm told there are some that are in the process of being, having the equipment installed. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But what's the balance for the balance?
Again, we will have the red line done in 17. We will have the blue and the orange line done east of Metro
Give me some
Center in
numbers.
17.
So we're at 3 in another year. Will we have 50?
I can give you the entire schedule.
Okay, I'd like that in the record, and you guys follow up. Again, if you don't have communications, I mean, when they couldn't communicate, and we held funds up a couple of times. I think I participated in that to get your attention. But we've got to have the communications between the stations, both for the safety of the passenger, but also for the crew and everybody else to communicate. So that's one that still undone. Okay, back to Hart. You had 16,800 recommendations, or defects, rather. Tell me the status of any of your recommendations that are undone or some of these defects that you cited.
Thank you for the question. This goes to the fundamental premise that we said the Federal Railroad Administration needs to be in charge, because when there are defects that aren't fixed, then the FRA would go after that. There is no...
I'll go to FTA in a second, but to your knowledge, there's still a huge number of defects that have not been addressed, one. And then two, the recommendations that you had, I forget how many you had of that, but very few of those have been met.
Well, let me clarify. It's not only defects that have not been fixed, it's also maintenance schedules that aren't being done. They were supposed to inspect that twice a week, and we found they were inspecting it monthly in the crossover. So that's an example of where their own internal requirements for, WMATA's own internal requirements for maintenance schedules weren't being met.
But again, you had the list of recommendations for improvements, and then we have a larger list of defects that were identified. Mr. Wiedefeld, you want to respond? Where are we?
We do have a very large backlog. Basically, we're prioritizing those on obviously the most severe, and that is one of the reasons why we're asking for additional time to do preventive maintenance on an ongoing basis.
What percentage of your maintenance is contracted out work and some of these repairs?
I don't know the exact percentage, but we have been using
10%?
In that range. In that range.
Okay. Well, based on the images that were given to me, you got a lot of people out there, but not a lot of them working, and something has to be done there. I mean, Mr. Jackson ain't going to like this, but, and I think you still have some negotiations to go or something, but whatever you have to, whatever steps to get somebody in there that can perform. If they can't do it, they need to go. If you hire and contract people, they need to perform and have them take over some of that responsibility. Okay, let me go finally to FTA. Since September, I think Mr. Connolly and I both agree, FTA has limited capability. It's been mostly a grant agency, I guess, to conduct the safety oversight. The recommendation from HART and NTSB was FRA. You want to speak to the deficits and capability that you have, and I understand some of that's been made up by partnering or cooperating with FRA?
Sure.
Mr. Welby?
So a year ago, when FTA determined that D.C., Maryland, and Virginia were not capably carrying out their state safety oversight responsibilities, which is part of the federal statutory structure, FTA used authority that Congress had given us, and we stepped in. And we have the authority to conduct investigations, and we've conducted 4 investigations during the past year. We've looked at stop signal overruns, track integrity, vehicle securement, and traction power. We've issued reports on 3 of those. We've issued requirements to WMATA for specific actions associated with those investigations. we've conducted over 300 inspections. We're on site at WMATA about 6 days out of 7 during the past year. And as a result of our inspection work, we've identified 900 defects for WMATA to correct. They've corrected about 2/3 of them to date. In a number of instances, our inspections of track have resulted in taking track out of service or slow orders. And the oversight of Metro Rail exercised by FTA is probably the most scrutiny U.S. DOT has ever applied to about 220 miles of track. We also have the authority to direct spending, and in 2 instances at least, we've directed WMATA to move spending from one purpose to another. We directed spending in one case to $20 million toward the 7000 series cars to replace the 1000 series cars, which are subject to an NTSB recommendation to remove them from service. We also redirected WMATA funds toward corrective actions that FTA identified a year ago, one of which includes replacing and updating a track management inventory system to get a handle on the defects that have been identified. We also have requested from Congress in the past the authority to issue civil penalties, and we've also requested the authority 3 times from Congress for the ability to, for criminal penalties since 2008. We've asked for that from Congress.
And that has not been granted. Let me turn to Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Welbs, listening to you, apparently you're just providing robust safety oversight. You're sitting next to the man charged with transportation safety who says otherwise. He says you don't have the capability. I met with Virginia authorities yesterday who are writing their part of the tri-state oversight, safety oversight legislation, which, by the way, Mr. Hart, is subject to legislative cycles. It doesn't happen like that. Our legislature meets in January and only lasts 2 months. We're a part-time legislature. And they tell me that you don't cooperate with them. That, in fact, when they seek information from FTA on Metro, they're told that it's proprietary. They've been denied documents and access to information they think is material. And I'd like you to address Mr. Hart, who says you don't have the capability. Far from your testimony of robust oversight, you don't have the capability for much by way of safety oversight, frankly. And you've had to borrow from resources from the FRA.
So, Mr. Conley, the recommendation from the NTSB we take very seriously. A year ago, when we recognized that the states were not performing their duty, we used the authority that we have at U.S. DOT. So we've requested authority from Congress, and the recommendation that Mr. Hart has put forward would require a member of Congress to introduce a bill that would allow the U.S. DOT Secretary to assign WMATA safety oversight to the FRA. And then FRA would have to substitute its rules for WMATA's rule book. So the Secretary cannot do that without Congress taking action.
Well, I will simply point out that the man sitting next to you, his agency authored a report issued yesterday that reiterated that it's the FRA that ought to have jurisdiction here, not the FDA, because of capability issues.
Right. So we have also requested from Congress additional resources and authority to put into effect the new safety responsibilities that Congress gave to us in 2012. So we requested back in 2009, after the Fort Taunton incident, additional Federal authority.
Why not just give it to the FRA as the NTSB recommended originally?
So Congress, in 2 successive authorizations, both in MAP 21 and the FAST Act, assigned that responsibility to the Federal Transit Administration, and we are assertively exercising it right now.
Does the Secretary of Transportation have the statutory authority, nonetheless, to act on the NTSB recommendation and give it to FRA?
The Secretary of Transportation could act on the FRA recommendation, which is to ask Congress for authority to reassign the role.
He chose not to do that.
A member of Congress can introduce a bill.
No, wait a minute.
The change.
Don't beg the question. The Secretary of Transportation received a report from the NTSB that involved fatalities, and their recommendation, very serious, said FRA needs to have this, not FTA, for lots of reasons. Not because you aren't willing, but because you're not capable. Yeah. And safety comes first. And the Secretary chose to do nothing about that other than give it to you. His hands aren't tied. I don't remember receiving any legislative request from the Secretary of Transportation to give him the authority to make sure he can implement the NTSB recommendation. This is not a trivial issue.
We have pulled together substantial resources. We've created a WMATA oversight office. We've pulled together a team from DOT, including FTA officials and other capable people in the department, to do direct oversight of WMATA.
So do you dispute the latest report from NTSB that says, despite your pulling together substantial resources, you weren't on the job at the East Falls Church derailment?
We have walked miles of track. We've applied more scrutiny to the 220 miles of Metro Rail than the Federal Government has ever applied to any rail system. While we've identified many instances where track has been taken out of service, we did not find the Falls Church incident. We are doing oversight of Metro Rail. Metro Rail is responsible for the day-to-day oversight. They actually have standards that the NTSB's report identifies, which call for 2 times biweekly reviews of all track safety.
Mr. Hart, I'm going to give you, I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. Mr. Hart, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that. Is that how you see things?
Fundamentally, the starting point of effective oversight is regulation so that everybody knows what can be done and what can't be done. Those aren't there. They won't be there anytime soon. We were looking at not only the structure. This is not a criticism of FTA. We're looking at the structure that presently exists. That structure is not there with FTA.
Right.
In order for them to have that, that's going to take quite a bit of time. The FRA already has it. We were looking to do an immediate remedy instead of waiting for all of that
And,
structure.
and does the Secretary of Transportation have the authority to implement that immediate recommendation of yours?
Our recommendation was to ask Congress to include within a list, that's a legislated list, this property, WMATA, so that it would be overseen by the Federal Railroad.
And did the Secretary act on that recommendation?
No, the Secretary said that he would prefer to leave the oversight with Federal Transit.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, you're a politician. You run for office, right?
Indeed, I just got reelected.
So one of the things, congratulations.
Thank you.
So one of the things we have to do in politics is build public support, especially for things that involve costs. Is that right?
Yes.
So do you think your comments and those of Mr. Price, your D.C. colleague on the Metro Board, are helpful to those of us in Virginia and Maryland in trying to build any kind of public consensus about a dedicated source of revenue when you threaten on that board to close down the largest single connection to Metro in Northern Virginia? Your remarks were calculated to be helpful to us. Is that right? Or were you just playing games to appeal to somebody in maybe your jurisdiction without regard to the implications in our jurisdictions where we're trying to actually be supportive?
The background on Mr. Price's comments is the following. Sure. The background on Mr. Price's comments is the following. We have a $290 million shortfall this year that will only get greater in the future.
Mr. Evans, I don't need a lecture about the current condition of Metro. I know it intimately. I'm asking you a question about what you and Mr. Price were getting at in threatening Virginia's largest investment in Metro, which, by the way, involves Federal funding. The largest single TIFIA grant in the history of the Department of Transportation went to the Silver Line. So it involves Federal participation. And that has implications for whether we renew the $150 million CIP, let alone talk about a Federal operating subsidy, which you and I share. And I'm here to suggest to you that your comments and those of Mr. Price were cheap and reckless and have huge implications on my side of the river you don't want. At least you say you don't want. You campaigned against the parochialism of your colleagues on the board, and yet you and Mr. Price are now the exemplars of the very parochialism you decried. And you've done real damage on our side of the river. You want to respond to that?
If you'd give me a moment, I'd love to.
Of course.
Yes. So again, everything is on the table in trying to deal with these huge deficits we have going forward. It's clear to me now that neither Virginia nor Maryland will do a dedicated funding source anytime in the future, and it's unlikely we will get any Federal help. So I have the cards I have, or the deck I have to play with. Mr. Price was only responding to a question in suggesting how we can save money. The Silver Line, as you know, is not being built by Metro. It's being funded by, as you say, Federal dollars and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Although, when the Silver Line is built,
and by a special tax district entirely funded by Virginia businesses.
I understand. But when the Silver Line is built, you turn it over to us to operate. The ridership on the Silver Line, as of yesterday, it was in our briefing, is 1/3 of what was predicted. The Silver Line was hoped that the ridership would be so great it would cover its operating costs. It's not even close. So we are today losing tens of millions of dollars on operating the Silver Line. When the Silver Line is complete, given the projections, Metro will then be losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year to operate the Silver Line. So Mr. Price, who is one of the most successful African-American businessmen in the country and is a turnaround specialist, looking at this as a business, was saying, how are we going to afford to operate the Silver Line to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year when we are losing $300 to $400 million a year already? So I think the answer, Congressman Connolly, and you and I are on the same page on this. So
I don't think we are.
We need more funding from the jurisdictions in the sense of a dedicated funding source.
First of all, I don't know whether Mr. Price is aware of the development plans along the Dulles Corridor, because we are building lots of residential development that's going to change those ridership numbers very fast, but it's dependent on the Silver Line being there. In Tysons alone, there are 5 high-rises that have gone up since we opened the Silver Line, with thousands of new residents. The goal is to go from 17,000 people who live in Tysons to 100,000, and it's the Silver Lines that's critical for that. But let me just say philosophically, you know, it's very hard to listen to that when you've threatened a regional veto for any service cuts that affect your district. But you have no compunction to say to an entire state that the major investment in Metro ought to be closed. And you go down that road, and you fracture the regional coalition, you fracture support up here, and you actually do real harm to long-term prospects for Metro. And that's my message to you. I've run out of time.
And I'm a big advocate of expanding Metro. I think the Silver Line will be a tremendous addition to Metro.
All right. So, Mr. Chairman, let me, Mr. Evans, let me come back to you then, because the gentleman makes a valid point. Are you suggesting that you looked only at Virginia to close down something that had an operational deficit and didn't look at other areas that have operational deficits for closing it down? Because I haven't seen any suggestions other than what the gentleman from Virginia is talking about and what Ms. Comstock has mentioned to me. And so you're saying that you wanted to protect D.C. and take it from operational deficits that are in Virginia and Maryland?
No, actually, Mr. Chairman, there's a long list of cutbacks in service, many in the district, many in Maryland, many in Virginia.
Well, but what I've read in the Washington Post and other places is basically anything that touches anything that has anything to do with Washington, D.C., there is this unbelievable outcry that we can't touch anything. Is that not your position?
Well, no, Mr. Chairman. Actually, as of yesterday, the district made a huge concession to allow the late-night hours to be curtailed yet again for another year and possibly 2 years, which is very much against our interests. But I was able to convince the mayor and the council to go along with that.
But not do away with them entirely forever.
Well, we'll see. You know, again, you evaluate everything every year or 2 years to make sure.
But you get my friend's point is that you're making a drastic comment that affects Virginia, and then just the little teeny aspects of inconvenience in Washington, D.C., you debate for hours. You follow me?
I do.
All right. So let me go on a little bit back to you, Mr. Wiedefield. Do you believe that the Safe Track program is placing the system in a state of good repair that will allow riders to feel secure and safe on the system?
I do, for the above-ground portion of the system, because that's where our focus has been on, particularly on the rail tie portion of it and the fasteners there.
All right. Mr. Evans, do you believe the same thing?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So let me come to the FTA. Do you believe that as well?
The Safe Track work is an important step as part of an overall.
That's not the question. That's a great answer to a question they just answered it. So just answer the question, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Hart, let me come back to you. I want to come back to the East Falls Church derailment and what the NTSB determined to be the probable cause of this. Could you help illuminate us for what the cause of that derailment was?
Yes, this is an area, it's a crossover area crossing over between parallel tracks, and it's an area that has wooden ties, and the wooden ties were left to deteriorate for quite a long period of time. This is a...
So what you're saying is it couldn't have happened in a short period of time?
Correct.
So this happened over a very long period of time?
Correct. Some of the ties may even go back to original construction. We don't know, but they've been there a while and they've been
So
deteriorating.
you're saying the original construction of that particular area has left without any maintenance that caused a derailment?
Inadequate maintenance in this particular segment where we investigated for that accident, correct. We had that's why we looked at how frequently were they...
Can we put the picture up on the screen, if y'all would all turn your attention to this. Now, if you'll notice that wheel there, actually the rail, I guess, is supposed to be between.
The wheel should stick outside of should be outside of the rail.
And so it's actually just on the top of the rail there. Isn't that correct?
Correct. Close to derailing, because it's supposed to on the inside side of the rail.
And so in your opinion, this would be something that is not only a hazard, but something that is a derailment waiting to happen?
This, under FRA rules, would have been required to be out of service because of the failure to meet the gauge requirements.
What kind of rules did you talk about?
Federal Railroad Administration rules would require this service.
So I guess that's why we haven't called them in, is because they would have seen this?
Well, their requirements would say if you see a defect, you have to act on the defect within 30 days, and this defect's been around for a lot longer than 30 days. This would have been acted upon or put out of service, one or the other, time ago.
So who's not doing their job?
Well, this is why we're asking for FRA to be overseeing this, because there are no analogous requirements by the Federal Transit Administration.
So let me come back to you at the FTA, because you keep coming back and saying, well, Congress can do this and Congress can do that, and I appreciate that. I know Secretary Foxwell, talked to him just the other day. So have you made a request for the Congress to actually give you the statutory authority that you seek?
Yes, so we are following up on a fact.
Have you made the request, yes or no?
Yes, we have.
All right, to whom?
Pardon me?
To whom?
We actually have the authority to issue regulations in the area that Mr. Hart is describing.
Well, then why haven't you done it?
We received authority from Congress to do that in recent years. We actually have an assignment in the FAST Act from less than a year ago.
But let me just tell you, it is not good enough for you to continue. We have derailments and injuries that are happening on a regular basis while you already, as you just testified, have the authority to fix it, and you're not fixing it.
So
how many more people have to die before we get you to act in the appropriate manner?
Chairman Meadows, the broad framework that Congress set forth and our regulatory structure right now has FTA holding transit agencies accountable for the standards they have in place. So, for example, WMATA's track maintenance and inspection standards are actually more strict for rail track lateral movement than the FRA standard. The problem here is that the culture overcomes the rule book in this instance.
So you're going to blame it on Mr. Jackson and all his union employees. Is that what you're saying? I'm going to get to the bottom of it here. You know, it's going to end today. I'm tired of the doublespeak.
WMATA does.
So is it his fault?
If WMATA was following its standards, the incident should not have occurred.
Whose fault is it?
It's a systematic fault of all the people involved in that process.
All right, so you're involved, so it's partly your fault.
We are overseeing WMATA.
So it's partly your fault.
To run its operation. And Mr. Wiedefeld has been taking steps to make the organization.
Okay, yes or no, do you have any role in the fault of injury here? Yes or no?
We take seriously our responsibility.
That's not the question. Great answer to another question I didn't ask. Are you partially at fault?
FTA's in lack of authority has been a contributor, yes.
You just told me you had the authority. Now, you can't have it both ways. Are you partially at fault?
Sure, sir.
So when are we going to get it corrected? Because let me just tell you, I'm tired of people blaming different people for the problem and having hearing after hearing. Mr. Hart has done his work. Mr. Wiedefeld is doing his work. We have a union that says that they're willing to give you and participate, and I assume even fire some of their own union members. I don't want him to go on record. He may not get reelected if he does. But I assume that they're willing to do it. And yet it keeps coming back to you and your unwillingness to get the appropriate people involved in the oversight and management along with the other team. So I want you to report back to this committee within 30 days the action plan that you're going to have to address that, to be able to work with the recommendations that we just heard, to be able to work with the recommendations that Mr. Wiederfield, Mr. Jackson with the union. 30 days, is that reasonable?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now let me finish with one other aspect. We are here today to get to the bottom of the problem. Mr. Jackson, I heard you say that you could come up with a plan to fix this, that if they just listened to your union employees, that you could do that. Now, I'm going to hold you to your word, because here's what I want you to do, is I need you to come back to this body within 30 days. I'm going to give you the same time. Is that fair, Mr. Jackson?
That's fair.
And I want you to come back with 4 recommendations on what we could be doing differently. And one of those recommendations needs to be what the union could be doing differently to actually fix this problem. Are you willing to do that, Mr. Jackson?
I am most definitely willing to do that.
All right. And my door is open to you where you can come meet with me at any particular time. If you believe that your union workers are not being heard, I'm willing to listen, because we're going to fix this problem. Mr. Wiederfield, I want to say this. You're making a lot of difficult decisions that will make a lot of people angry, and I told you earlier before this that this is not a good career move for you, because anything that you do to fix a problem is going to be criticized by somebody. But here's what you do have. You do have a bipartisan support with Mr. Conley and I and others on this committee, that what we're willing to do is, if you'll make the tough decisions, we'll ask the tough questions and hold people accountable and make sure that we do that. So I want to thank you for your work, and I'm over time, and so I'll go to the gentleman and recognize him for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Briefly, just a comment, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Conley. 15, 20 years ago, as a local elected official in the San Francisco Bay Area, I came back here with a then surface transportation policy project with some members from California to look at WMATA and the land use decisions you were making here as a model for California, where we know in a car culture we have to get transit ridership up. And in the Bay Area specifically, where BART doesn't carry, as the Bay Area Rapid Transit System doesn't carry nearly the number that you do, it's still 5% of our total trips, and when they went out on strike, we saw the implications for the region. I think it was $75 million a day that we lost in production. So, Mr. Wiederfield, the challenges you have as somebody who's believed for over 20 years that as we become more urbanized, we have to change our land use patterns. You have great examples of transit-oriented development that we've tried to replicate around the country. You're in this conundrum as a retailer where your ridership's going down because of lack of confidence. You have to lay point-of-sale people off in support system. How do you get that back? Understanding that safety's first, but the retail aspect of you've got to get ridership up. And I'll put this in the context of how you were perceived once around the country, and how anecdotal experience. The last 2 years, as a member of Congress, I've been looking to purchase a piece of real estate here in the metropolitan area. And I looked across the river, I looked on Capitol Hill, and my realtor said, you want to be on Capitol Hill because you can't trust WMATA. If you go across the river, you won't be able to trust it. Well, that contradicts all the planning that you have done, Mr. Conley, the local elected officials, that we have replicated in other parts of the country where we want people to be able to live in different areas and help with the cost of housing. So, long-term, you get the safety problem fixed and the urgency of now, but how do you get that confidence back, and how quickly can you do it so we get transit ridership back up?
What we have to focus on is getting the trains running on time. That's the bottom line. And there's two elements to do that. One is the track. We can't have issues in the track when we have open for revenue service where we have to pull trains down because of some issue. And that's what we're focusing on for 17 and now and into 17. And the other is the cars. Basically, we have a very old fleet, and we're changing out that fleet. The sooner we get that done, the quicker we can get into more reliable service. So that's the other focus for us, because that's where I have to focus on. The safety has to be, obviously goes forward all the time, but we've got to get the service reliability up, and it's around tracks, and it's around cars, and that is our primary focus for 17.
Okay, and just a comment about FTA and NTSB, and Mr. Weebles, I appreciate you at least admitting responsibility, and I share the Chairman and Mr. Connolly's frustration. Again, in the Bay Area, it's been very hard and frustrating because I think this is a national problem. We can't consistently have 5–10% transit ridership as the total trips in regions in metropolitan areas in the United States. It won't work. It doesn't work. It's inhibiting our economic growth. Los Angeles is making great strides, but they're still 4 or 5%. So whether it's Congress, whether it's partnership with you, we have to change your role. I've asked former acting administrator who used to work with me at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, of whom I have much respect, Teresa McMillan, can you at least give us guidelines about best practices on our budgets? What's the appropriate, with a range of what we should have in operating reserves, capital reserves? How can we help with our negotiations to make sure that our employees who live in high cost of living areas like the Bay Area, most urban areas, get a fair and equitable wage, but still maintain the retail and the safety excellence so you get that ridership back up. So as an observation, this is a national problem, and I really wish that FTA and the administration and the future administration would act with Congress in bipartisan fashion to figure out what your best possible role is, not just when it comes to safety, but best practices around finances. And with that, I would like to yield the remaining of my time, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Connolly.
I thank my friend. Mr. Jackson, over to you. I heard your testimony, and it sounded good about, commitment to customers and so forth. What about ATU, and what about the union's responsibilities, though, in terms of accountability? We have a situation, I'm not asking you to prejudge it, but in theory, do you agree that if somebody falsifies records and endangers public safety, their job ought to be on the line? I mean, we had the union try to overturn a decision made by the general manager when we had an operator who blew through a red light, endangering lives. Now, maybe there was a good case. I am all for due process. I'm a Democrat. I support unions. But I also insist there has to be some accountability in the workforce, and that it's your job to join with management in making sure that the trade-off is good wages and performance. And I want to hear more about that, because I didn't hear a lot of that in your testimony, especially after yesterday's release of the NTSB report on a derailment that involved workers who falsified records.
Well, Mr. Connolly, I would be more than happy to touch on that.
I can't hear you.
I would be more than happy to touch on that a little bit for you. As far as workers and the falsification of documents, one, you will have to really understand the culture at WMATA. If you go to these workers and you are asking these workers about these documents, these are the documents, and part of it is training and the harassment that the workers receive from the managers. Why would a manager give a worker a task that he knows is impossible to complete?
So you're, hold on, you're saying that they falsified the records because they were harassed to be able to, Mr. Jackson, that's a big leap, because if that's happening, so you're saying they falsified the records because someone forced them to falsify them?
No, in their mind, they did the work. Let me explain it to you. If you give me a task that takes 45 minutes to complete, and I go out there, and in my mind, I complete that task in 5 minutes. I went out there and I inspected what you asked me to look at. Then what you're doing is you're setting me up to fail. So now if I go back and I do not finish those 30 inspections that you know I have no way of completing, I'm disciplined for not finishing my inspections. So what these guys are doing is they're doing their inspections to a standard.
They're falsifying the
culture
records.
is
Mr. Jackson, let me just tell you, you'll find I'll be your biggest ally, but if they're falsifying the records, they need to be fired.
well,
Pure and simple. I mean, is there anybody that falsified records that should have been fired?
is there anyone that falsified records that should have been fired? Yes, there has been.
So you're going to recommend that to Mr. Wiedefield?
I'm never going to recommend it.
But you'll go along with his recommendation on firing them?
I'm going to recommend that we look into the situation.
That's not what I asked, Mr. Jackson. You're starting to get contagious. It's starting to come over here. You're answering the question I didn't ask.
Okay, well, I'm never going to recommend firing our employees. That's what
Will you support the termination of someone who's falsified records that may have caused the injury of someone else?
if it was their intent to falsify the document, yes, I will.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I'm going to recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Comstock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to reiterate some of the points that my colleague from Virginia made about the board statements this week, really not only being troubling but irresponsible. And they were called political theater by our governor in Virginia, and I would agree with that also. But I think this week demonstrates really why we need to have major changes at Metro, much like what the Federal City Council is recommending. We need to blow up the compact and change it quite considerably, make big changes here. We need to get rid of the binding arbitration, which is not allowing Mr. Wiedefeld currently to be able to make the changes he needs and put the people on task in the way to get the job done. And then we need to change the board. Mr. Delaney and I have a bill that we have on changing the board, but we need to make these decisions so we don't have this type of political theater. So I hope in the new year with our new transportation secretary, who not only has a lot of experience in transportation, but in the labor department, that we look at all these issues and right-size Metro so we can have this partnership that we agree on and support. So I think those were very destructive things that were done, and I was not only very disappointed, but it only reiterated the need to make some major changes here. And on the same front, with the union, I'd like to ask Mr. Jackson, is there a Mr. David Stephen that you're aware of? Is he here today with you?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Is he here? Could you point him out to us?
Mr. Stevens?
Yes. Okay. Well, Mr. Stephen is somebody in the same line of Mr. Connolly being concerned about the attack on Virginia. He tweeted out recently, and I think he's been tweeting today's hearing and making some slights against Chairman Mica, that Barbara Comstock is our enemy. Do you believe that, Mr. Jackson?
Ms. Comstock, I believe that we just have a difference of opinion on how this transit system and our binding arbitration should be handled.
Okay. Well, let me tell you, we have worked here. Last year, we've worked together on Metro. We got the money restored that some on my own side tried to take out. I worked to do that. I have been working with my colleagues in the region. I serve on the Transportation Committee. When you have that type of mentality, we've been working with Mr. Wiedefeld. Their staff has been very cooperative, and it would be helpful, and Mr. Meadows just pointed out on reasons to fire people, and I think Mr. Connolly pointed out too. Here's a headline: Metro Union sues to get fired worker back on the job after the deadly smoke incident. This was another incident where falsified reports happened. So you're still pursuing keeping that employee who falsified records. You want to keep him employed.
So, Ms. Comstock, what you have to understand is that we have what's known as binding arbitration, and the arbitrator decided that this employee should keep his position at the authority. And I believe that even in his findings, there may have been some statements along the lines of, it's the culture at this company.
Okay, and on the culture, I'd like to, and I actually think this would be something helpful for all of us to do on a bipartisan basis. I would like to go out with your track workers, come out with you and see what the process is, because I don't understand. It seems like nobody has any records of this. People say there aren't records. You're making accusations that people are asking you to falsify it. Is anyone familiar with iPads and phones? Do you have these things? Do you have one?
We also have a cell
Do you all
phone
have
policy.
them? I understand that there's very easy technology where people can come out and record this and record what's going on there. And if you record that, there's timestamps on it. There's technology that other transit services use. They've come in and showed us this. I think that would protect you and your workers because it would show that you are on site at a particular time doing something. And if somebody said you didn't, you'd have that proof in your hands in that report that could never go away. And if we could have the track system recorded, and I don't know what FTA is doing, are you using any type of physical report instead of paper reports?
Yes, we have been recording all of our investigations
Okay,
and
because
inspections.
we need to have that, so when Mr. Jackson makes reports saying they went out to do something and they were told to falsify it, this shouldn't be a back and forth of finger pointing. We should have evidence that shows what happened when you went out. We had the technology. This is 2016. This isn't hard. I mean, can somebody tell, I mean, do you use that at all, Mr.
We're not
Jackson?
allowed to use that.
You're not allowed, why not?
Well, because the authority have a cell phone policy, an electronic device policy in which...
No, I'm talking about having some type of technological thing that records what you're doing, not your particular phone, but technology that would allow you to record that.
We are not allowed to have any type of electronic device in our work zones.
Well, I understand we don't want you on the phone. I agree with that.
Well, any kind of electronic device, meaning any type of electronics would be needed to record something, and through
But
binding
I'm talking about
arbitration, we
recording
have
your
laws.
work, recording the work.
Recording the work. Again, the workers are not allowed to have any type of electronic device which will even record our work.
Okay, well, Mr. Wiedefeld, I think we talked about this at the last hearing because we had people come in with that technology to do that. Is that being looked at? Or?
It is, basically, not only for individuals out there, but just doing it by driving over the system and basically recording electronically
Exactly.
the condition of the system. So we're pursuing that right now.
Okay, because we should be able, now if he's made accusations about this, we should be able to factually pull that up and check. I mean, we're long past having to have this type of finger pointing when we have the technology. Then I'd also like to take a
Ms.
look.
Comstock, your time is expired. We'll keep it for a second round. We've got a few other folks that we've got to go to, but if you'll stay here, we'll come for a second round. All right. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Delaney, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, they say companies go bankrupt two ways, slowly and then all at once. And it seems like the same things happen to Metro. Across time, through your really decades of bad decisions, we've gotten to the point that everything has collapsed upon itself. The difference is with a company, if it has a reason to exist, it goes through a restructuring, it brings in new governance, new management, and it gets new capital, right, and it begins the path of a turnaround. The problem we have here with Metro is there's no obvious forcing function to allow that to occur, because it's not a company. It's this multi-jurisdictional enterprise. The jurisdictions will continue to fund it at low levels. It'll limp along. It won't be able to do the restructurings it needs to do, and it can't change the governance structure. But ultimately, right, cutting through all the stuff we've discussed here today, that's where this has to go. We have to get to a point where there's actually not a change in management. I think the general manager is actually doing a good job. That part of the turnaround is occurring. But where governance has to change, no disrespect to the current chairman, but the Metro Board governance model has failed. Where we need new governance, the gentlelady from Virginia and I have a proposal to do that, as she mentioned. We need to restructure contracts that don't work. We need a new strategic plan. We need new money from all the stakeholders. And that has to occur in some kind of forcing function where it all kind of is brought to the table. And then Metro can, because it clearly has a reason to exist, if any enterprise has a reason to exist, it's the Washington Metro, and then the turnaround can continue. So my question to the chairman and to the general manager is, what can we do to accelerate the occurrence of that day? Because that day, which I define as the day when the governance model changes, we're in a position to restructure, and only if those things occur will the stakeholders put more money in, and they have to put more money in. What can get us to that day as soon as possible? Because that's what's in the best interest of Metro and all the various stakeholders, including the constituencies.
Thank you, Congressman Delaney and Congressman Comstock. I happen to agree with both of you. And if you remember, the original suggestion of getting rid of this board and having a 5-member board was mine, to a lot of fanfare back in the day. But now the Federal City Council has adopted that model. What their suggestion is that the Federal Government, Congress, withdraw its support of the Metro Compact.
Right.
If they were to do that, the compact then collapses, and all the jurisdictions are out, and you have to start over again. My suggestion is a 16-member board from all the jurisdictions is not workable. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. We've heard the comments here today. All of us, including myself, end up being parochial, because we do. A 5-person board, like the D.C. Control Board of local people, but here's the catch. It's not the number, although 5 persons is the best number, with extraordinary powers like you're talking about. The D.C. Control Board had the power to access money from the Treasury.
Right.
To
And,
negate.
Mr. Chairman, I've seen those proposals.
Yeah, yeah.
And whether it's that or similar
Yeah,
flavors.
yeah, I'm
Right?
with
They
you.
all involve change of governance, restructuring, and more resources. What can get us to, because now we have these proposals floating around out there.
Yes.
And it's one of these situations, and to my mind, any of them are better than what we have now. What can get us to that day? I mean,
Just what I said.
because again, it's not an enterprise that one day
No, you're
runs
right.
out of money and files for bankruptcy.
Right.
That may be the biggest problem with Metro, is that it doesn't have that forcing.
Right, right.
What can get us to that day?
Again, the Federal City Council has that legal outline if Congress withdraws its support from the compact. That will be the triggering mechanism that the compact then collapses, and everyone is forced at that point to get back together again and restructure the system. And the structure from 40 years ago just doesn't work. Just like the dedicated funding source, that has to be a part of it. The other 5 major systems all have a 1% sales tax. We don't have it. So all of that has to be a new board, a new tax, all of that. And you can make this system work.
Does the General Manager have an opinion on this? Thank you, Chairman, by the way.
It is around the compact. I mean, that is, I think, the mechanism to attack this.
Okay. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair.
Would my friend just yield for one observation?
Of course.
While he still has time. Yeah, it's complicated. It's also complicated by I find it ironic that the District of Columbia that talks about taxation without representation, which I support, would nonetheless favor a system at Metro that would take away representation from the people who pay the taxes. In Virginia, it's localities, not the state, that pays the operating subsidy. And you're going to find fierce resistance to those taxpayers to lose their representation.
And reclaiming my time briefly, I'm not proposing...
You don't have any more time. I took it. No, I'm teasing.
That's your
I'm
way.
just teasing.
I'm not proposing any specific governance model, new governance model. Restructuring, more resources. 50 different ways of doing that. That's where we have to get.
All right. I thank the gentleman. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, we'll go a little different place than we've been so far. Just a couple months ago on September 13th, there was a train that apparently came to stop outside the Farragut North Station. Apparently for a while there was no communication between the operator of that train and the ROCC. Mr. Wiedefeld, could you comment on that? Apparently, even prior to that time, there was concern they couldn't contact the operator. So not only did the train stop, but there was no contact between the operator of that train and the central location. Can you tell us a little bit what happened there and whether you think it's appropriate that it happened?
Sure. One of the issues we have is once a operator leaves the cab, in effect, there is no communication with the remaining 6 or 8 cars, and they have a walkie-talkie. So there were some issues around that, and so that is, again, a personnel issues that we're dealing with. Did they follow all the rules they were supposed to follow at that time? But the reality is when an incident occurs in a tunnel, and if there's only one WMATA employee on it, once they leave that cab, in effect, you've lost the ability to communicate. You're walking through a very crowded train, depending on what the conditions are, and you're either talking. We do have megaphones, for instance, in the cab that they're to take to try to help with that communication. But what we have to do is figure out ways to get the ROC to be able to talk to the train while the cab where the operator's no longer in the cab.
Okay, as I understand it, there was no communication between Control Central and the operator of that train. Is that accurate?
There was some, but it was not done according to the policy that they should have been following.
Okay, there were concerns even before that Central felt they weren't getting a hold of the operator, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, but unless we charged ahead. Now you're telling what happened, the reason there was no communication between the operator of the train and the passengers is the operator got up and began walking through the train? Is that
Yes, that's exactly what they had to do.
Okay.
And that's what they should have been doing. That's exactly what they should have been doing.
Okay, in other words, they didn't, were they unable to communicate with the passengers otherwise?
Yeah, once you can communicate with the passengers when you're in a cab. But as you do know, we have problems on that issue as well, because if we use different series of cars, when we put them together, the communications don't work. So that's a technical issue that we're addressing with the 7000 series. But once they leave the cab, in effect, all they have now is their walkie-talkie and a megaphone to communicate.
And apparently, because of the lack of communication, some passengers got tired of waiting and began walking down the track?
Yes, there was definitely frustration, and I think just given some of the current conditions, I think that's what occurred. We obviously never recommend anyone leaving the car. That would be like, if you're frustrated sitting on a tarmac in a plane, taking the slide down. That's just not acceptable.
Okay, yeah, kind of a scary thing. Were you aware that, was any employee of Metro aware that these passengers were walking alone down the tracks?
Yes, and that's what exactly, they were just outside the station. Other employees were there and were walking to the car, and that's when they saw these individuals leaving the car.
Was the third rail still on at the time?
Yes, it was.
Shouldn't somebody have been hitting the panic button and say, we better turn this thing off?
Basically, that's what they grabbed these people immediately, put them up on the walkway to get them away from that, and that's what caused a lot of the delay, because then we had to go, in effect, and inspect around the cars, make sure no one else was out there.
Kind of unbelievable, but just like everything else here in Washington, why would it work? But I'll give you another question. You guys always say the problem is lack of money, and I know that in any big organization today, one of the problems we have is health insurance costs. What type of health insurance plan do we have for the employees of the Metro, and what's the cost per employee per year?
I can get you the details, but there's two levels of health care. One is for the non-represented employees, which is about 2,000 people, and the other is tied to the represented employees, which is about 11,000 people. The 11,000 people is through negotiated settlement, again, through the whole body and arbitration process. The other we have more control over, and just recently we reduced the cost of that system by basically charging our employees more for the non-reps, but I'll have to give you the details.
How many non-represented employees do you have?
2,000.
2,000? So you got a total of 13,000 people. What is your cost per employee?
I just don't have that number. I can get it to the committee.
About 18,000 a year, 17, 25?
I don't know. I just don't. I don't know.
Would anybody here know?
Yeah, if the gentleman would yield, I actually have some of those numbers. If you'd like, I could ask about them because I have some.
Sure.
And I know 75% of the cost, 75% of cost of Metro is wages and benefits, is my understanding. What the information you had given us was that the average salary, for example, for controllers was, over the past few years, between $77,000 to $87,000. And I believe the starting base salary was $71,000. Because with overtime, and there's much overtime, like there was one controller who made $216,000 because of overtime in 1 year, $216,000. Now, this is the information that Metro gave us. So there's a policy where the people, my understanding is when there's overtime, the people who have the most seniority, and this again is in the contract, so the highest salaried employees who maybe are about to retire get the first dibs on the overtime, so they're able in your last 3 to 5 years run up your salary, so you get a $216,000 salary, and then that overtime is tied to your pension. Is that correct?
Okay,
So if that is, and I'm cutting. I know
Yeah,
I'm
the
cutting into your
gentleman's time has expired. You can maybe reclaim for one quick question.
Right. The question I had, and I don't know any other people know it, it's not a matter of giving the employees more of the cost of their health insurance, although that's sometimes necessary. The cost is what type of plan do you have? Is it market-based or that sort of thing? I would hope that one of you up there, one of the four of you, would be able to just tell us what is the overall cost per employee, both the employee share and the employer share of insurance? I mean, if you don't remember last year's, maybe remember a year before that. Is it 18? Is it 25? Is it 22? What is it? What do you guys, any one of the five of you can tell me? What is it?
Mr. Wiedefeld?
I just do not have that.
Can you
Mr.
get
Jackson, do you
I
know?
can get that to the committee, yes, I can.
I don't have it either.
It's just amazingly incompetent for none of you to have any clue what that is. But it just shows that, but whatever, I'm done with my time.
Mr. Wiedefeld, I thank you for being willing to get that back to the committee if you'll get that response. The chair recognizes Ms. Watson-Coleman for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. That was a little concerning to me that a person with a base salary of $77,000 to $80,000 a year could have overtime as an operator to the tune of 200 and some $1,000 a year. I mean, when does that person sleep? That's a little scary to me. Mr. Wiedefeld, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions because I really like to know what you think you need, and do you know what you need in order to make this system operate efficiently and effectively and encourage people to use it, because I think public transportation is vitally important to our environment as well as just to our lifestyle. So, do you have a comprehensive plan that lays out all of the things that you need to do with your cars, your tracks, your electrical, your whatever?
We do. In fact, on all those levels, both on the track and on the cars is our biggest focus for the upcoming year, but we have it for our buses, we have it for our paratransit service. A big part of it is working closer, I believe, with the union employees and getting to some of those core issues. I agree with that as well.
So there is a plan that goes for what, 5 years, 10 years?
We have an overall plan, but I'm focusing particularly on the 17, remainder of this year and 17 to get to some of the core issues that we have to address immediately.
Okay. But to get the system in good repair, you have a longer-term plan, right?
We do. Yes, we do.
So do you anticipate a certain amount of money that you need in order to accomplish this, both long-term and then incrementally to get to that long-term?
Yes, we have a program for the next 6 years for both operating and capital of what we would recommend.
And do you have what you need? Or is there a running deficit?
No, we have a deficit on the operating budget in the upcoming year of $290 million. Now, obviously, we have to have a balanced budget, so I've proposed a certain way to get there that the board is considering right now. On the capital side, like any other major infrastructure, the capital needs are always much larger than what we have available. We've identified a total need of $25 billion, but that is, we have a capital program that we're proposing of $7.2 billion over the next 6 years to chip away at those issues.
So, so that, if you have a 7 times 6 is what, 56? You have a $7 billion plan
Over
per
6
year
years.
for 6 years?
Over 6 years. It's roughly about 1.2, 1.3 annually.
Okay. So what what's going to be your deficit there?
Well, we have a deficit on the operating side of the equation.
Not on the,
Well, the capital side is, again, you always have more capital needs than you can afford.
But we're really focusing on the fact that your infrastructure hasn't held up the way it should, and there have therefore been serious injuries and loss of life and things of that nature. So that's where I'm trying to focus right now on.
Right. And we believe for the upcoming year that we have enough dollars to, again, move in that direction to bring the entire system to what we call a state of good repair, to get it to a base level, not expansion, but basically get to that base level.
Okay. All right. I don't think I really know the answer to my question, but I'm going to yield my time to my very eager colleague here.
I thank my friend. Mr. Wiedefeld, Mr. Evans talked about utilization and cost and loss on a certain line in the system. Do you maintain an actual cost, loss, or revenue gain for each station or each line of the system?
No, what we do is, we manage this as a regional system, and that's the way we look at it.
Well, how is he able to disaggregate the silver line from everything else and declare that it's going to cost something projected into the future?
I don't know what numbers that were thrown around.
Well, let me just ask this. If we're going to go down that road, this committee if, with the permission of the subcommittee chairman, wants to see data on every line and every station. And if we're going to start talking about closing things based on gain or loss, we're all ears, we're all eyes, and we'll be participants in that, I assure you. So we want to see that data. Since it got brought up, why pick on only just one part of the system? Secondly, Mr. Evans, you were talking, interestingly, on the board about the affluence of certain members of the compact, certain parts of the compact. In fact, you made reference to jurisdictions I represent in terms of their median household income. Was that a predicate to maybe changing how we finance the operating subsidy based on median household income and ability to pay rather than utilization or physical presence of Metro in a jurisdiction?
Mr. Conley, all of my comments are directed at getting the attention of Maryland and Virginia that we need a dedicated funding source.
But why would you pick on the measure on median household income and affluence? What was the relevance of that?
What I was saying is Fairfax County is the second richest county in America, and Arlington's the sixth richest county in America, and yet we cannot get a dedicated funding source for Metro.
Yeah, and this goes back to why I think your comments about the silver line are reckless. So let's take Fairfax County, which I've represented for a long time. It's 400 square miles. How big is your jurisdiction?
62.
How many stations you got?
How many?
Stations, Metro stations.
40.
40 in 62 square miles. If you take out the silver line, Fairfax has 4. And if you're generous with Falls Church, 5 in 400 square miles, Mr. Evans. It's a very difficult task persuading our taxpayers to increase their subsidy, or let alone vote for a dedicated source of revenue, if they're not served by Metro. And that was the genius of the Silver Line, to finally get service to the nation's premier international airport, which is a federal responsibility we're bearing. And secondly, to anchor the largest jurisdiction and the wealthiest jurisdiction as a stakeholder in Metro. I urge you to contemplate that next time you decide to opine about the relevance of Metro in my jurisdiction. Thank you.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Byer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wiedefeld, first I want to thank you again for, as many have done today, for making the hard decisions. John Kennedy said that to govern is to choose, and you clearly have made these choices. You weren't able to address in your spoken testimony, but in your extended written testimony, you talked about the speed restrictions outside National Airport. And many of my constituents who regularly use the yellow and the blue lines question why the speed restrictions are in place so soon after the safe track work has been completed. Can you explain when those will go away, or why they're still there?
Sure. The speed restrictions had nothing to do with the condition of the track. It had to do with a near miss out there. We have certain parts of the system where we have very tight curves, and that one happens actually is an S curve. And that, so we wanted to reduce the speed. There was actually a line of sight issue. We worked with the National Park Service to remove a tree to do that so we could start to bring that speed back up. And then what we're doing is we're instituting an electronic technology so that when workers are out in one of those blind curves, in effect, they are alerted that a train is coming, and more importantly, that the operator knows that someone's in front of them. And then once we have that in place, then we can bring speeds back up. But when someone's out there, we just want to make sure that they're not in danger.
Okay, great, thank you. You know, much has been made about the culture, state of the culture at WMATA. And this, the hardest thing to change and the most important thing. How long do you think it's going to take? What are your steps to change the culture? And I'm going to ask Mr. Jackson this too. Do you see the union as a willing partner in this culture evolution?
I do see the union as a willing partner with this culture evolution. Well, I would just ask to go look at the union's statements over the last few years. We've been asking for this, I believe, since 2009, or maybe even before then. I do know that during I can't remember the GM guy's name right now, but he came with Kubitschek and the rest of them. We have been saying this for a while, that the authority have a serious cultural problem. We have a very serious cultural problem, and something needs to be done. It can't get done by management disciplining their way out of this safety culture problem that we have. You can't discipline your way to safety. But if we sit down, the union and management come together, I believe that we can fix this problem. I mean, and in my professional opinion, I don't even believe we need the FTA to do it.
Let me ask.
All we need is the training.
Let me ask the general manager the same question about culture, difficulty, time, and willing partners.
I know we have willing partners. I've met with hundreds, if not thousands of our employees, and basically they're very proud. And a lot of things that you're starting to see now is the result of the safety culture taking root. So, for instance, about 3 weeks ago or so, we had an issue with the 4000 series that was raised by a middle manager person that basically said, wait a minute, there's an issue here, and we pulled those cars out of the lead on the trains. A lot of the other speed restrictions, you mentioned one, but there's a number of speed restrictions that have been occurring over the last few months. That's coming from line employees, and that's exactly where it should come, and that's what we want to promote. But I do believe with Mr. Jackson, there has been a culture here over decades that has evolved, and I'm not going to turn it around in months, but I think it's going to be a concerted effort by management and labor to do that.
Great, thank you. Chairman Evans,
yes.
We've given you a hard time today because of your comments about warning the Blue Line could be closed for 6 months, or that you cut suburban Metro Rail service if Virginia and Maryland didn't contribute more money. In November, you floated the idea of a federal takeover of WMATA, and just last week, this notion of not continuing Silver Line Phase 2, even though Virginia's paying to construct it. I know you're working very hard and very passionately about dedicated sources of revenue and all that, but how do you respond to all of these statements which seem to deepen the parochial divides and perhaps further undermining rider confidence in our system?
Thank you, Congressman. Actually, I think, and you take those statements one by one, what I found when I came to Metro and became chairman is a lack of awareness, because of Metro's fault, nobody else's fault, in this whole region of how bad the situation was. On the operations side, as was pointed out by, I believe, Chairman Mica, we had just celebrated Richard Sorrells' leaving as one of the great times in Metro, and the whole thing was a wreck, and nobody knew it. The finances, when I walked in there, I couldn't believe what I found. We hadn't had a clean audit in 3 years. Everything was in chaos. What I've tried to do in the last year is to raise the awareness of the region, starting out with close the Blue Line for 6 months. We needed to do something to fix these lines. Paul's Safe Track program is a follow-up on just that statement. The idea of a control board for Metro. It's been adopted by the Federal City Council. So all of these statements, which were inflammatory at the time, actually proved out to be what Metro needs. And I have to say, Congressman, we're not even close to fixing this thing. There is a lot that needs to be done. But I will say this, we are light years ahead of where we were a year ago at this time. Enormous progress has been made.
Great, thank you. Mr. Jerry, go back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes a gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Well, it's good to hear that some progress has been made, but I want to look more closely at the capabilities of the Federal Transit Administration and what it brings to its role as the entity with responsibility for oversight and safety at Metro. So I'd like to begin with Mr. Welbs. How many safety inspectors does FTA currently have?
So we have a team of 10 people working on our safety inspection. We have 24 people total who are involved in WMATA inspections and oversight right now.
So 10 people and 24. What are the 24? Are they on detail from other agencies?
There's a combination of 13 FTA employees. We also have some contractor employees. We also have some detailees from the Federal Railroad Administration and the Federal Motor Carrier Administration.
How many detailees do you have?
I can report that back to you.
And do you have any contractors who help perform FTA's safety inspection responsibilities? And if so, how many?
I will provide that to you for the record.
Okay. And Chairman Hart, for the purposes of comparison, how many rail inspectors does the Federal Railroad Administration have?
I'm sorry, I do not have that number. I could have to get back to you with that.
Okay, great. And Mr. Welbs, when FTA conducts its oversight duties, does it have federal regulations to refer to, or does it regulate Metro based on the standards that Metro has established for itself?
So at this time, we enforce Metro standards. We hold Metro accountable to carry out its standards.
Its standards, okay. And is FTA working on a rulemaking regarding federal standards for transit operation?
Yes, we are.
That's good to hear. And what is the status of that rulemaking?
So in this past year, we've issued 4 safety regulations, one related to state safety oversight, one related to bus testing, another one that is our national safety program, which is the overall framework for FTA carrying out the new authority that Congress gave it recently. And then in the coming months, we have 2 more regulations that we are issuing. One is the Public Transportation Agency Safety Regulation, and a safety certification training regulation that's also ready for issuance.
And Chairman Hart, for the purposes of comparison about FRA, does it hold the railroads it regulates to establish federal rules or to the standards that the railroads establish for themselves?
Well, there's a clarification I think that's warranted here. Our understanding is that what the Federal Transit Administration is putting out is not regulations but voluntary safety standards. The FRA puts out regulations, which means you must do this or you cannot do that. So I think there is a large distinction there between the 2 activities. And I'm not sure that under the circumstances where FTA is intending to be a temporary body, I'm not sure under those circumstances they would be eager to create an entire infrastructure with regulations and inspectors to find out if the regulations are being followed. They're trying to see the states take this function over sooner rather than later. So I'm not confident that they would ever want to create that infrastructure that we think is necessary that the FRA already has.
Do you agree with that analysis, Mr. Welbs?
So,
that it's voluntary, not a real regulation?
In the future, our intent is that there will be certain mandatory standards. There will be also voluntary industry standards that agencies will follow. There will be a combination.
Well, certainly with Homeland Security, do you have standards in Homeland Security that are federal?
Yes.
You do. I want to look at FTA's day-to-day oversight of Metro. Mr. Welbs, how many FTA inspectors are assigned to oversee safety at Metro?
So we have, as I noted, a team of 24 people total in our Washington Metro Safety Office, which we established a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do FTA inspectors produce regular reports on their findings at Metro for review by senior officials? And how often are these reports produced? Who reviews them?
Yes.
And has FTA ordered any specific changes in Metro's operations to respond to findings that have been identified by these inspectors?
We have. We've done 2 things. We've done targeted investigations of key problem areas, for example, red signal overruns, track maintenance, and then we also have conducted day-to-day inspections. So we've conducted over 300 daily inspections, and they've resulted, as Mr. Wiedefeld will know, in, I believe on the investigation side, 251 specific corrective actions that WMATA is supposed to carry out. And of those, some of them are ones we brought forward that had been assigned by the State Safety Oversight Agency. About half of them are ones we've identified during the past year.
Okay, my time has expired.
I thank the gentlewoman. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Virginia for a very quick 1.5 minutes since they've called votes.
Okay. How many people, actually, the information you provided with us earlier is that there are about 5,000 employees in the Transit Infrastructure and Engineering Services, the TIES department at Metro. And my understanding is that comparable transit networks have about 19 of those employees per track mile, and Metro has 42, according to those statistics. Would that be correct?
I don't know. I would have to look at that. I just don't know.
Okay. Could we get that information? Because I think what we really need to have, and what we haven't been able to get, is How do we, I know you've said it's costing more and we're doing less, and we need to get comparable data. And I know Mr. Evans has said to me in private meetings that the contract is unsustainable, and having $100,000 bus drivers or $216,000 controllers are a very difficult thing. I'm sure your teachers in D.C. don't make $216,000. My husband is a teacher, who was a teacher in Fairfax County. I can assure you does not make $100,000. Our teachers don't in Fairfax. So this wealthy county that has been referenced, their teachers, their firefighters, their police are not making $216,000 or $100,000. And these are people who often have graduate degrees and others. So I'd like to get that comparable data, and we need to have that. But I'd also like to, given Mr. Jackson's comments today saying that people are forcing them to falsify things, those are very serious charges, and I think we need names and information on that. And you very factually stated that, so I would hope you would present us with facts that back that up. You are here under oath today, and I think it's incumbent if you have employees, because if your employees are being exploited like this, we need to have that information. So I would ask you to provide us names and places and incidents and go back to your employees and give us that information. And then I'd like to make my request again, and I hope you would be able to take us sort of on a tour so we understand when your employees are called to do this, whether it's 42 per mile. And I should also point out that these are people who, from the APTA data that we have compared to what Metro is paid, your workers are paid considerably higher. You are aware of that, Mr. Jackson, right, than the average?
I know that what our workers make were their salaries were negotiated with WMATA.
I understand they were negotiated, but for example, the track workers who, with their benefits, make $55 an hour is comparable to the average of $30 an hour. The wage and hour rate is 36, then benefits are 17. The Davis-Bacon track laborer makes 23, and then $7 with fringe benefits for 30. So your employees are paid more, considerably higher than Davis-Bacon and higher than the national average. Would you agree?
Well, I will agree that our employees also have to go behind those same contractors and redo the work that they have done.
Well, so you're saying even though you have 42 miles workers per track and as opposed to 19, you still aren't able to, and you're paid more. So I'm looking at the data that Metro gave me. These employees are paid more, and there's more of them than the average, and yet you're not acknowledging that?
Well, are you asking for the quality of the work?
No, I'm asking for the salary. So maybe if you could provide me, your union with that. I know your union's under investigation right now by the Labor Department. Is that correct?
We're not under investigation by the Labor Department.
Well, they've sued about the election wasn't properly held. Is that correct?
Yes.
But do you have somebody who could provide us with the information on the salaries and all that? Because you've made claims that you're paid, I think, publicly outside of this hearing, that you aren't paid more than the average, and that there's some kind, and you're asking for considerable salary increases. Is that correct? In your current negotiations?
We're in contract negotiations now, and that's what they are. They are negotiations.
Okay.
So
for this $53 an hour, you're asking for more?
we're asking for more. The authority is also asking for more. So that's why it's called negotiations. We will negotiate with the authority, and we will come up with something that I believe will be fair for everyone.
Okay. Well, I think, again, I would reiterate, that's why the Federal City Council has pointed out this is unsustainable given the costs that are not comparable to the national rates, and why we need to get rid of this existing compact and the binding arbitration that makes it impossible for the leadership here to really implement what you're asking them to implement. I thank the chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. I thank our witnesses. We do have an opportunity to make Metro great again. I think this panel is in very good hands. Some of you may wish one of these days that Congressman Mica was back chairing these hearings. There being no further business before the committee and the dual subcommittees, government operations and Transportation Oversight, this hearing is adjourned.
Yeah.